The line we keep hearing is that this information was not classified because it didn't include, quote, sources, methods, or locations. We heard that today from Director Gabbard, Mike Waltz, even from, the Senate Intel Chair, Tom Cotton. What is your response to that, and how should Americans understand what was happening? Should they be outraged, or is this much ado about nothing?
No, I think Americans should be outraged. And this is actually some of the information that was included in that signal thread. I know that this administration is trying to parse through what classification means. I can tell you.
And making the argument that they can decide what's classified and what's not.
Correct. And that is not how that works. Anytime, anything before an operation, it is completely classified. So the fact that the Secretary of Defense put the sequencing of events, the timeline, the tick-tock of what was going to happen at this time.
The equipment being used.
Exactly. The aircraft, airframes that were going to be used on the strikes, that in and of itself is classified. And so just because he's the Secretary of Defense and putting it in an unclassified group text does not mean that he had the authority to declassify that. And frankly, what he did was put our fighters who were in the air about to conduct that operation at risk. Because if those text messages had been intercepted, the Houthis could have adjusted their formation on the ground and could have shot down one of our fighters.
And Congressman, I want to ask you now, this information didn't have to come out. Jeffrey Goldberg initially was very circumspect about what he would say, what was in these messages, because he was concerned about classified material having been in it. But, he said he felt like he had to release it after the administration attacked him and his credibility. Here's what he said about it earlier today.
Anybody with common sense can understand that that is highly sensitive information, especially before an attack. So they can play a semantic game, but it's just silly. It's not. You know what it is? It's not serious. It's like, this is national security in the United States. The Houthis are a terrible group of terrorists. Like you have to be serious about confronting these challenges to the security of the United States.
Congressman, now that that entire text chain pretty much has been released, how does it complicate damage control efforts for the administration, particularly Republicans? I was speaking to a former senior congressional Republican staffer before I came on this morning, and they said they can't believe that they're trying this denial tactic. It just doesn't make any sense given what's out there. Talk us through what you're seeing.
Yeah, someone needs to be fired. And there are probably Republicans actually telling that the White House right now. The reason these had to be released is because the Trump administration used the technique they use all the time and often very successfully, which is to just, pound away at the person involved in this, who is the good faith actor, in this case, the editor of The Atlantic, and create a false story for the American people. Representative Castro, in that hearing, that Tulsi Gabbard and to John Ratcliffe was right. They're lying to the American people. The White House is lying to the American people. And I think what you saw from The Atlantic is also a bit of a posture of what the free press should be doing, which is to show the American people when the administration is lying, they're lying, but also the critical substance of this, which is the Trump administration is currently making America less safe. They jeopardize the operations of this mission. They jeopardize the safety of our men and women in uniform. And then they turn around and they want to try to use the Atlantic editor as a foil for their own malfeasance. This is a story that America understands well. Republicans on the Hill understand it very well. And where they often fall in line, and I think virtually all of them will, I assure you that privately, they are asking for somebody to be fired. This is a moment where the White House has to relieve somebody within their national security team. Trump doesn't like to listen to people. Maybe he doesn't, but that's what's expected right now.
I also want to play you part of what we heard from National Security Advisor Mike Waltz last night. Let's take a quick listen.
It's embarrassing, yes. We're going to get to the bottom of it. I just talked to Elon on the way here. We've got the best technical minds looking at how this happened.
So you don't know what staffer is responsible for this right now?
Well, look, a staffer wasn't responsible, and look, I take full responsibility. I built the group.
So a staffer did not put his contact information.
No,
but how did it end up in your phone?
Well, that's what we're trying to figure out.
Okay, but that's a pretty big problem.
That's what we've got the best technical minds, right?
That's disturbing.
And that's where, I'm sure everybody out there has had a contact where it was said one person and then a different phone number.
But you've never talked to him before, so how's the number on your phone?
Look, I'm going to agree with him there and say we've all done something similar to this. We've all texted something to someone you didn't mean to or replied all to an email. But That's why you don't do national security things on your private phone, is my understanding based on folks I've talked to. Congressman, he seems really focused on how Goldberg got on the chat, not the fact that the chat was unsecured on an unsecured phone. Is there any reason to think that the administration will learn a lesson here and won't make this mistake again?
Look, history has suggested they won't learn the lesson. I think probably Mike Waltz will. I mean, right now what you're seeing is him mislead and obfuscate. And it's really sickening and disheartening to suggest that somehow Elon's going to come in and solve this problem. Mike Waltz and 18 of our highest serving elected officials or unelected officials in our administration, 18 of them were exchanging information about war plans on an unclassified platform. That in and of itself is the danger. The fact that you actually then included somebody outside of the administration creates the secondary danger. But the fact that this administration, our highest ranking national security officials, are using an unsecure platform, an unclassified platform to provide war plans among themselves, this is not an administration that's ready for prime time. And I know a lot of people are looking back at the confirmation hearings of the cabinet officials and other senior officials, and they remembered then it didn't feel right. These people didn't feel like they were ready. They weren't qualified. This is the JV team. 6 weeks later, we're seeing it in action.
All right, Aaron, I want to turn to you. I'm wondering if you've gotten any updated reaction from the White House since these new disclosures from The Atlantic came out this morning.
Well, Christina, we do expect the White House press secretary to brief here in the next few minutes. She's running a little bit behind with the briefing. You can imagine that she'll be asked again about this situation, about the story in The Atlantic, about these messages, this conversation that went on between these top national security officials. To this point, though, the White House has really been sticking to the lines of response that it has been over the last couple of days here. We've seen mostly an effort to discredit The Atlantic and the editor-in-chief who wrote both the story that was published on Monday and the story published today. You saw the White House press secretary post on X earlier today that The Atlantic has conceded these were not war plans, sort of making reference, I think, to the different headlines. The article today used the phrase attack plan versus on Monday when it used the words war plan. And then also there's this effort by the administration to really focus in on the success of the ultimate operation that we're discussing here, the attack by the U.S. on Houthis in Yemen. I want you to hear a little bit, though, of how President Trump responded to some questions about this. This is an interview he did with Newsmax last night. Watch.
And what it was, we believe, is somebody that was on the line with permission, somebody that was with Mike Waltz, worked for Mike Waltz at a lower level, had, I guess, Goldberg's number or called through the app, and somehow this guy ended up on the call. Now, it wasn't classified, as I understand it. There was no classified information. There was no problem, and the attack was a tremendous success.
Now, Mike Waltz, the National Security Advisor, has since said that he takes full responsibility. He says he formed this group, this Signal texting group, and takes responsibility for that. At the same time, though, Christina, there again is still this effort by the administration to say that there was no classified information in this group, despite all the people who have worked in national security and in the military who've come out and said the opposite. The administration is sticking to the line that there was no classified information that was compromised here.
Sabrina, is that good enough? I mean, if they're saying that this particular thing, wasn't classified, it seems like they're parsing words here. And not only that, you also had not only what was going on in the chat, but you had, Mike Waltz was tweeting out in almost real time what was kind of happening on the battlefield. Yeah. Taken together, it seems to me, I grew up in a military family. It seems to me if a regular rank and file officer had done any one of these things, they would have been dismissed. Why don't you think there's impetus from the top here, so far at least, to have someone take responsibility with their job?
I think exactly what you said. Like, if this was any other DOD employee or any other civilian employee across the government agency.
If you've done this as a spokesperson.
If I had been in the administration and done this, I would have been immediately placed on leave and an investigation would have been opened into why exactly this happened. I think what's important to note here, too, is Secretary Hegseth not only took classified information and put it in this chat, but classified systems are separate, physically separated from unclassified systems. So that means he typed typed up the information from either a binder that he was looking at
He's
from
not
a computer.
copying and pasting it or forwarding it. He's taking it from one device to another.
You cannot copy and paste it directly. And so I think there has to be a wide sweeping investigation into, are they using their personal phones to communicate on this? This is clearly not the first time as well. So what other operations have they discussed on these, open channels that we know the Russians are trying to intercept, especially when you have the entire national security apparatus engaging in this casual text thread on an open channel?
All right, Melanie, I want to go to you. What are you hearing on Capitol Hill? Are you hearing anything from Republicans that they're not willing to say in a hearing?
Yeah, well, there was certainly some heated moments during that second hearing today, and the Democratic lawmakers really confronted the witnesses over their assertion that none of the material shared on that Signal chat was classified. They also pressed the witnesses on why just one day earlier they testified under oath that they weren't aware of some of these very specific details that were shared on that Signal chat, including information about weapons and specific targets. Now, Gabbard's response was that she did not recollect that information at the time. And she also, in multiple instances, shifted the responsibility to Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, including on a question over whether there should be additional investigations. Take a listen to that exchange.
The threat is in the House. The threat is across the dais, and I need to ask these questions. It's my job to ask these questions of you. You, according to our law that we passed here bipartisanly, have an obligation when you think there has been a tangible, significant leak of information to instigate an investigation. Do you not think it's important to do such a thing?
Well, the National Security Council is investigating this inadvertent leak. And again, I point to Secretary Hegseth as having the classification.
I would argue that Secretary Hegseth, if he had the dignity that he needs to have, should be walking his resignation in, because I believe that his probably is heading toward being relieved of his duty based on what I think are significant and illegal leaks, most likely.
Now, no Republicans have echoed those calls for resignations, and it's also unclear whether there will be any serious congressional investigations into this incident. But there have been at least a handful of Republicans who have had some sharp words for the White House over this incident.